Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Facebook Live session here at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. Today we will be talking and discussing the issue of women at work. With me today, two guests, Shauna Olney, who's the Chief of Gender, Equality and Diversity at the ILO, International Labour Organization, and Laura Addati, who's the Maternity Protection Specialist and Work and Family Specialist. A lot of questions. We really hope that you will engage us, ask any question that you feel important, and they'll be more than happy to answer those questions. My name is Guebray Berhane. I work for the ILO in the Africa region. First question with you, Shauna. Can you tell us a little bit more about this Women at Work initiative?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And first of all, just to say what a great pleasure it is to be here. Yesterday there was a discussion about the future of work, and I think it's really useful and interesting to follow with the discussion about the Women at Work Centenary Initiative. One of the questions we often get is, why is there a Women at Work initiative separate from the Future of Work initiative? And I think it's a really good question. Now, we know the ILO is going to be 100 years old in 2019, and that's a very exciting moment to reflect, to look back, to take stock, to look forward. And we need to really look at what's happened with women in the world at work. We need to delve into that because, quite frankly, women haven't done very well in the world of work. Now, just to quote one of my favorite citations is from Jim Clifton, who's the CEO of Gallup, the world polling company. And what Jim Clifton says, coming out of their polling data, is the most searing, clarifying, helpful, world-altering fact is that everyone, men, women, across the world, what they want is a good job. And women aren't getting those, not in terms of quality and not in terms of quantity. So we need to really drill down into that, find out why, and come up with very creative solutions.
Shauna, there's also an issue of sustainable development and the link with the gender equality, meaning there cannot be a sustainable development without gender equality. But you just mentioned that women are not getting those jobs, and they have higher education, but at the same time they're not getting these jobs. What would be the reason, and why do we have this huge gap?
I think that's something that we're still exploring. But let me just give you an idea of what some of those gaps are, because I think we were quite surprised. The ILO launched a report in March called the Women at Work Trends Report. And what was interesting and extremely worrying coming out of that report was that over 20 years, some of the major labor market indicators, things have not changed. Now we get this impression that, okay, there's more, women are doing better in education. They are, but that's not translating into jobs. If we look at the gap between women and men in employment over the past 20 years, that gap has closed by less than 1%. And I think that should be really an issue of concern. If we look at the pay gap, for example, it's really stagnated at about 23%. So women are earning only 77% of what men are earning. And we're also seeing that you can't just link that to education, to experience, to sectors. We're now being able to break down that pay gap, to see that, no, there's big factors that can't be explained. And that's very much where discrimination comes in. So I think we have some really key issues that we need to look at in a different way, and we need to find out how to move forward in a more, in a really transformative manner. And when you talk about the Sustainable Development Agenda, it's all about transformation. So, and that's really what we're looking at in the context of the Women at Work Centenary Initiative. How can we really help to move that transformation forward?
Thank you, Shauna. For the viewers who just joined us, we are live on the Facebook session here on Women at Work. And I'm now turning to Laura, who's a specialist on maternity protection and also work and family issues, to get more the nitty-gritty, the details of it. Laura, the Women at Work report demonstrates that there's an inequality, a staggering inequality between women and men, and that it persists across a wide spectrum of the global labor market. Now, could you tell us more about the trends, the regional trends, perhaps a little bit of insight on that aspect?
Guebray, can I just intervene here just very quickly, just to say Laura was one of the main authors of the report, and to say that it was a report that people worked on across the House. I mean, what we can see is that we have to look at gender equality from a holistic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Guebray. As Shauna mentioned, the progress in getting women into more and better quality jobs has been disappointing over the last 20 years. We learned from the report that the employment to population ratio of women stood at 46%, vis-à-vis almost 72% of men. This makes a gender employment gap of 26%, which is enormous and has not been changing over the last 20 years. The reasons behind this inequality at work can be explained by the increasing urbanization, workers moving from subsistence agriculture to services sector, also better access to education, and also when we observe that when households have better, higher incomes, women tend to drop out of the labor force. And this is what we are observing, for instance, in regions like Eastern Asia, where women and men employment rates are decreasing, but coming up from a high range. But in other countries, in other regions like Southern Asia, which are driven by trends in countries such as India, women labor force participation has been decreasing, but from a lower range, moving from 26 to 33 to 26% since 1995. The reports point to some structural barriers underneath these trends, pointing to the obstacles such as cultural norms, discrimination, also violence in the world of work, and also the extent and the unequal share of unpaid care work between women and men. The report shows that at least women perform up to 2.5 times unpaid care work compared to men. And this results in a number of gender inequalities at work, which Shauna has mentioned. For instance, this prevents the large share of unpaid work, prevents women to engage in employment to the same footing as men. For instance, we see that women makes up almost 60% of those working short hours in economic activities for the market. But when we put together time that women and men spend in unpaid care work and household work, which is also all this drudgery work, collecting water, especially in low-income countries, are related to the lack of basic infrastructure, social protection services. We see that women spend longer hours of work daily compared to men. On the better side of regional trends, we can observe that in some regions like Latin America, while gaps remain high, the women labor force participation has been increasing, and this has been linked to progress in health, which has also been related with a drop of fertility, but also better access to social protection services, cash transfers, but also improved access to early childhood care and education and subsidized childcare services. And this is very important to also understand that there is really more efforts that needs to be done on targeted action to reduce gaps at work.
Do you want to add something?
If I could just add one thing, we talked about care work, and I think one of the important things is how we redistribute that, and that was one of the things you mentioned has been part of the solution, and that's where we really need the negotiation and the involvement of men. I mean, we can redistribute in terms of the worker, the enterprise. We can redistribute in terms of, the social security system, the government system, and the worker. But we also have to redistribute within the family, and I think that's going to be extremely important moving forward.
Very good points, both Laura and Shauna. I'm turning now again to our audience, to our viewers. Obviously, if you have questions, please do not hesitate. We are still at the 105th session of the International Labour Conference. This is a Facebook Live session. And we have a question from Sandy, which basically asking, would it make sense to require companies of a certain size to include women on their board of directors? Who wants to answer this question?
Do you want me to take that? Okay. The issue of quotas on boards is certainly a controversial one, though I think becoming less controversial, because it's now being required in more and more countries. So you have in the Scandinavian countries, you now have in Germany, where if you have, as Sandy points out, if you have a company of a certain size, you have to have women on your board. Now, companies want to do that voluntarily. There's a good business case for having women on boards, and we have lots and lots of evidence of that. But it still doesn't happen. So even though we have Credit Suisse, we have a whole range of reports that say more women on your boards means fundamentally higher profits. Your outcomes are going to be better. It doesn't seem to happen naturally. So these quota systems can push that forward, and I think it's working. It seems to be working in different countries. So it has to look at the country context. It should be part of a conversation, social dialogue. We're all about social dialogue in the ILO. But it is certainly one method that does seem to work.
Sandy, I hope that answered your questions. But if you have other questions for this Facebook Live session on Women at Work, please feel free. Please send us your questions. Engage our specialist here on the Women at Work issues. Laura, I'm coming back to you with this trends issue because they are very, very worrisome. And now, how do we go from diagnosis to solutions? What are the key recommendations?
Thank you. It's a very important question, also in the context of our discussion on the future of work. And the report points to looking at the Sustainable Development Agenda, which has put the achievement of gender equality and empowerment of women, all women and men, as a specific goal, but also as I would say a cross-cutting issue across all the goals, in particular those where the ILO is more involved in promoting gender decent work, reducing inequality, reducing poverty, and many more. The report, looking in particular at the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 5, points to the role of public policies and infrastructure and social protection in valuing and recognizing, but also reducing and redistributing unpaid care and household work. The ILO has put forward a number of instruments, convention recommendations, which guide policy formulation in terms of addressing those issues, in particular, for instance, the importance to provide maternity protection to all women without exclusion, looking in particular to those groups who are more vulnerable to economic and social vulnerabilities. This is fundamental. Nationally designed social protection floors, which provide a minimum income around childbirth for the support of children, providing essential health care is particularly important. The report also looks at the importance to value those jobs in the care economy, which are many times performed by domestic workers. Many of those are migrants coming from ethnic minorities. Being of the human beings who we care the most, our children, dependent elderly people living with HIV-related diseases. This is essential to value also of putting men into the equation, the role that men play in transforming our societies. And we observe, for instance, based on a report which was published in the ILO in 2014, Maternity and Paternity at Work, that since the ILO is serving trends in legal provisions, in 1994, only around 40 countries provided statutory paternity leave, while now we served almost 95 countries. This is very important. Sometimes it's symbolic because the leave is so short. We cannot expect will change, will transform the dynamics in the family, but it's very symbolic to recognize the right, the responsibilities of men of getting engaged with, bonding with their children, supporting women's breastfeeding, and having this precious time to dedicate and to share the care. And I will stop here. And maybe Shauna would like to add something on
just on that last point. I think is so important because I think fundamentally men have been losing out as well. And I'll always remember, this was a number of years ago when I was working in a law firm. One of the partners said to me, "I don't know my children and they're leaving for university." And I just remember the pain in his voice. He was really suffering. His children were going off. He was about to retire. He was going to have all this time now to spend with his family, but his children weren't there anymore. And I think we've put a lot of pressure on men in terms of, they go out, they have to earn a living, but they have suffered in terms of not having that role with their family. So I think if we look at this transformation, the transformation is not just for the benefit of women, it's for the benefit of men as well. And we have to be equal partners in that. Can I ask you a question now? I mean, sure. I know you're here to ask us questions, but
that's gender equality.
That is gender equality. And also, it's interesting that we have two women talking about women at work, and yesterday we had two men talking about the future of work. I think these conversations have to start coming together, and they are in the ILO, which is very important. But you're a man, you work in Africa, you're from Africa. Do you see the attitudes and the mindsets of men in Africa changing? And I know it's an enormous continent, so it's. But from where you are, do you see things changing?
Thank you, Shauna. I think that the general awareness is there, no matter what. But it's a process, and as a process, it takes time. So obviously, there was the one thing we're sure about is that we can reverse that process. The idea of behind a man's success, there's a woman. No, it's no longer that. Next to a man's success is a woman. That's how we should look at it, if we think in terms of success.
And next to a woman's success is a man.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I mean, seriously, I couldn't do my job if my husband wasn't absolutely sharing the care at home. I mean, as far as our son's concerned, it's the dad who does the cooking. And we have to share it. We have to share it completely. Otherwise, there's no way I could be doing this. And I think we both...
I can totally relate with that. And I think it works very well if we have a personal story on that. And for me, the eye-opener was my wife, Salamawit. And the way she had to make a decision that she shouldn't have. Women shouldn't decide between their career or their family life or any other decision for that matter. This decision should be taken together. And I think we're getting there, surely but slowly. Can I take questions now? We have questions from Jamie. Jamie from the UK. You want to know, does gender inequality feature more in emerging, developing, or advanced economies? Who wants to take this question?
I'm going to give that one to you.
Thank you, Jamie, for this question. The fact that gender equality, achieving gender equality is again an important feature of the Sustainable Development Agenda really shows that cannot be social economic development without gender equality. And we see that there not can be societies where gender equality is high in education, income, and health without equality at work. And this is why the ILO agenda comes so prominently in contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. There cannot be economic development without gender equality. And then we see also, coming back to the discussion on policies, that a number of countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America are now adopting paternity leave, implementing paternity leave. Iran, Moldova recently, and also Paraguay have adopted 2 weeks paternity leave, which is much better and higher than statutory provisions in higher income countries, and this is a key in terms of achieving gender equality. Also, that we see an enormous progress in gross enrollment rates in early childhood care and education, and this is something that also lower income countries are really catching up, and we see that this plays a key and important role in getting women into more and better jobs. So I would say, I don't know, Shauna, if you would like to add something on.
Sure. Just to say, Jamie, that gender inequality has many faces. It's certainly not static, and I think it's moves and changes in every country, whatever the level of development. What's interesting as well from the Women at Work Trends report is we see that there is absolutely no correlation between economic development and the gender pay gap, for example. So just because you have more economic development doesn't mean that there's going to be a distribution of income, that there's going to be equity and equality. So it's, the correlation is not as clear as one would maybe expect it to be. Thank you.
Thank you. So you heard it here. That was Shauna Olney, the Chief of Gender Equality and Diversity at the ILO, and Laura Addati, the co-author of the Women at Work report, and at the same time a specialist on maternity protection and work and family. We are on the Facebook Live session, day 6. Questions are still popping. Let me add another one. This one is from Nancy from New York. Nancy, you want to know if once women are in the workplace, what are some simple steps employers can take to help everyone achieve the work-life balance?
Yes, this question is for me. Thank you very much, Nancy. This is very important to open this conversation, because we found out that now having gender equality, having women, keeping women talents is really a priority in the business agenda, and a number of policies can really be implemented at the workplace, going even beyond collective bargaining agreements or the national law, in really creating these enabling environment whereby having care responsibility becomes normal. It becomes normal, a normal fact of business life, and it's something also that the manager can encourage, just treating this as a normal fact, that everybody at some point will have care responsibilities. We might not have children now, but we might have other care needs at some point over our lives. So making this as a normal part of the way that business is run is very important. So having this cultural change is very important. We also learn from research that even when the policies are there, but the culture doesn't change in terms of the approach to, for instance, men taking leave. This is really, it becomes less effective, that having a good policies, but men are sort of waiting what will be the attitude of colleague and the manager. It's also important that policies support initiative, support employers, workers in implementing a healthy work-life balance by, for instance, funding maternity leave through social insurance or public funds. So preventing employers to bear the cost of funding these policies, this is essential, and we see that it's really correlated with the take-up rate rates and also to other important development indicators. So it's important to create a policy environment, but also a workplace environment that allows this healthy work-life balance.
And I think just to reinforce that work-life balance has to be for men and women. So if you have policies that are only for women, that can be problematic as well, because it starts to reinforce those stereotypes. I was in Japan at a conference not too long ago, and we were talking about flexi time and teleworking and how that was only being picked up by women. So companies are putting into place those policies, and they're available for men and women, but only women were taking them up. So it basically became a women's policy. Then the company moved its headquarters, so there was a really long commute. So a lot of the men started taking up the teleworking as well. And then suddenly teleworking was good for everybody. So again, you're sort of changing the conversation, you're changing the perspective, and you're getting men involved, and I think that was very important.
Changing the perspective, getting men involved. You heard it first here with Shauna Olney, the Chief of Gender Equality and Diversity at the ILO, and Laura Addati here taking questions. She's the co-author of the Women at Work report. You have so many questions popping up, so we really invite you to add more questions. This is a live session, a Facebook live session from the Palais des Nations in Geneva on women at work issues. A question from Aisha. She wants to know, where have you seen the most improvement in terms of gender equality at work?
The most improvement, it's a difficult question because it depends on where you start from. We have improvement in many places. We see in some of the Arab states, for example, we see a really high increase in women's labor force participation, so getting women in the labor market. But that's coming from a very low base, really starting very, very low. We see in other places trying to put in really progressive policies in some of the Scandinavian countries, again going from a much higher base. So I think every improvement is an important one wherever you're starting from. Did you want to add anything to that?
We see also, coming back to the trends in labor, in the labor market, we've seen that there is an increasing awareness that care policy, supporting care, promoting social protection to really address providing a minimum income security for all, as for instance has been done in Latin America, although the situation is not perfect and the gaps are still high, is something that also some countries would like to look at and to sort of step up and increase progress in labor force outcomes.
Okay, I think we've addressed a lot of issues, especially regarding women at work, but does that mean that the Women at Work initiative, the Center initiative, is only about these issues, or do we have other issues that we would like to project? Let's see ourselves in a couple of years now. What do we have on the pipeline?
Well, we have some exciting things in the pipeline with the Women at Work Centenary Initiative, but one of the things the Director General has said to us is don't assume we know all the answers, don't assume we have all the issues clarified, because quite frankly, if we haven't really moved in terms of some of the main indicators in the labor market for women, something's not right. We have to do things differently. So he's really challenged us on this. And so we spent a lot of time trying to think, well, how can we get more information? How can we get different information? So one of the things we're doing is we are partnering with Gallup, the survey company. They run a world poll every year, over 150 countries, representatives, about 90% representative sample of the population. And so we're working with them to put new questions in that world poll to really find out, we want the voices of women and men all across the world to find out what is it that women want in the world of work and why aren't they getting it. Now, some people talk about this as a perception survey. Now, it's not it's too soft for some people. These are people's realities. These are what they are living. And I think it's really important that we give them a voice. So that's running right now, that poll, and we'll be launching a joint report with Gallup in March next year. So I think that will give us some new information. So we don't want to foreshadow everything we're doing because we want to be guided by what comes out of some of this work. We're also having Women at Work dialogues on different issues around care, around pay, around various issues that really are central to this debate. And of course, in 2018, at that International Labour Conference, when we meet here again, we'll be talking about violence. Now, for ILO constituents, violence has gone way up on the agenda. Clearly, you cannot have decent work for women or for men in a context of violence. So now there's going to be discussion about a possible treaty on violence, an international treaty, or a recommendation, or both, and to see really how we can start addressing violence in a much more holistic and a much more effective way. So those are some of the things moving forward. But this is an ongoing process, and we also hope coming into 2019, which will be our centenary, that what happens with this initiative will also inform the possible centenary declaration. So moving into our second centenary, we'll really have a new blueprint for moving forward on gender equality.
Thank you, Shauna. For those who just join us, our viewers who just join us, that was Shauna Olney, the Chief of Gender Diversity and Equality at the ILO. We also have Laura Addati, the co-author of the report Women at Work, and also a specialist on maternity protection and work and family. Some people might have asked again the same questions regarding the quota issues, because this is a very sensitive issue. I have a question here from Ingrid. She's asking if the creation of gender quotas is an important step to boost the number of women in high-level positions. What's your take on that?
This is a slightly broader question than the one on boards. So I think one always has to be a little bit careful with quotas. They can be that springboard. But we always have to evaluate whether these quotas are in fact reinforcing equality. So they're helping to overcome a historic disadvantage, which won't happen unless you have a real springboard. You need something to get us out of that disadvantaged situation. They have to be monitored to make sure they're not actually reinforcing stereotypes, they're not actually going in the other direction. And they should be, to the extent possible, temporary. So yes, they can be a stepping stone, but they should be the product of consultation, of discussion, looking at the specific context, and making sure, again, that they don't, in fact, have the opposite effect. So I think they can be very powerful if used properly.
If used properly is probably the right answer. You have also another question from Jamie, who's interested in... he said, I understand we are focusing on employment, but should we also focus on education and quality education?
This is certainly very important, and we see that in a number of countries now even women outperform men. They represent the largest share of graduates, and this has been really an important step. Efforts towards quality education is essential, and and this also implies the education to play a role in changing gender stereotypes. The report also talks about affirmative action, but also about the role of education and also training programs in pushing women and men to break the traditional pattern in terms of study, and also getting into sort of women and men-dominated jobs. So this is something important that also should be at the heart of education programs. However, it's important to underline that education alone is not sufficient in achieving gender equality at work. And we have seen that the progress in education have not been translating in equally progress in the labor force. So it's important that along with these efforts in improving the quality of education, the coverage, it's essential to address having targeted action to address discrimination, to addressing care, to making sure that tools that promote equal pay for work of equal value, including wage transparency, promoting minimum wages that really and collective bargaining that really play a role in reducing low pay, where women actually women are overrepresented, really plays an important role. So education, yes, better education, but also targeted action.
Thanks, Laura. Just to add to that too, we've heard in a lot of these Facebook Live sessions this week a lot about youth employment and the importance of focusing on youth, and that's absolutely really important. And I certainly don't want to minimize that, but I think we have to be careful, as Laura was saying. If we talk about education, we can get it right there. We can get young women and men into jobs. But if we take our foot off the gas pedal at that point, then we're going to find that there's a rolling back. Because if we look at the whole life cycle or the working cycle of women and men, we might get women and men into the same level of jobs, but women will have obstacles going forward. So we have to look at the whole working cycle, and we have to have policies, and we have to be vigilant throughout that cycle.
So I think I'm going to ask you one last question to both of you. Actually, we've talked about quotas, we've talked about the role of men, we've talked about the report itself, the facts and figures, all the key issues, the discrimination issues, of course. But if you have to summarize for our viewers in one sentence the key message that they need to take from this session, what would that be? I'm starting with you, Shauna.
Okay, one sentence. If we want transformation, we can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
A great sentence. Now I have a challenge. I would say, really, the future of work depends on the future of women at work.
These are excellent sentences. I think we summarized basically the whole session. This was a Facebook Live session from the Palais des Nations in Geneva on women at work. I'd like to thank Shauna Olney, the chief at the ILO of Gender, Equality and Diversity, Laura Addati, the Quotas, and let's see what we can do after the sessions in terms of concrete follow-ups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.